Listen and you'll know.
First of all, if you haven't heard this yet, I love this.
Rod Arquette on Talk Radio 105.9 KNRS.
Utah lawmakers will gather up on Utah's Capitol Hill January 28th. And a lot of issues to talk about. And it's going to be interesting to see how much of an issue this gets, how much attention will be drawn to this issue. A state lawmaker is now filing a bill to repeal SB 54. That was a compromise bill to allow a dual track system to allow people to get on the ballot. That lawmaker is State Senator Dan McCay, who's on our Newsmaker line right now. Dan, how are you? Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Ron, how are you?
I'm good, Dan. Thank you. You were a sponsor of the original bill when you were in the House. What has changed your mind, Dan?
Oh, boy. 2012, I think, is when we first started talking about the count my vote process. And you had some folks that were trying to negotiate with the party, Mike Levitt and company. And, you watched that process from 2012 to 2014 when Senate Bill 54 was passed. And its whole goal was, get rid of the initiative. And we could come up with better policy if we just put together an initiative. And we attempted to put together a signature path and along with preserving the caucus convention system. And delegate balance was struck. And I would say the delegate balance was struck while, a lot of people were still on the sideline trying to figure out how they felt about the law. And you've watched since 2014, here we are getting ready for the 2019 session. We are 5 years into Senate Bill 54. And I have yet to find a measurable, quantifiable benefit to the Democrat, the Republican, the Libertarian, or any other party for that matter. And all I've seen at the end of the day is consternation.
Dan, as I recall, and you may remember this as well, that as the legislature was trying to do something with this, there was, the proponents of this, the Count My Vote proponents were saying, hey, look, folks, we have the votes. If you don't do something like this, we're going to do away with the caucus convention system completely. In your mind, did they actually have the votes?
And that's just it, right? Every night before I go to sleep, I ask myself, did they have the signatures? I've done that for 5 years, Rod. Did they have the signatures? Did they have the signatures? And if they did, then I do believe that if they had the signatures and they got on the ballot, then they would have passed back in 2014. Fast forward now, 2018, they ran the initiative again, which, was counter to our deal, but they decided to run the initiative again. It appears that their total purpose was to try and weaken the caucus system even further by lowering the signature threshold. And I think the Count My Vote people were displeased by how many people were still using the caucus convention system potentially. But they looked at it and they said, well, if the courts are going to throw out the requirement that unaffiliated are allowed to vote in the primary and thereby able to sign signature cards or signature papers to allow candidates to use unaffiliated voters, then the pool is much smaller. The only thing that defeats that, and the problem is I just don't have the money that Count My Vote has to tell the story, but Count My Vote knew, and so did I, that there was probably a problem with requiring unaffiliated to participate in the Republican Party primary. And as a result, they negotiated severability language into the bill. And it was a very last minute thing. They had done their math. They knew what the thresholds were going to be without the signatures of the unaffiliated voters. And they were fine with it back in the time when they made the deal. Maybe they don't feel good about the deal. I mean, at the end of the day, we've all bought a car potentially that we didn't like after we purchased it, but that's the deal. And I hung doggedly to that deal because I'm a man of integrity. And then when they decided to run their initiative, I felt like the deal was at least canceled by one side, and they've argued the legislature's broken it, yada, yada, yada. At the end of the day, I just don't see any positive benefit out of Senate Bill 54. And like in the car analogy, if I sell my car to somebody and they promise to bring me the money next Friday and they never show up, I don't know why you shouldn't be able to get your car back.
Yeah, that's for sure. Dan, let me ask you this: the main backers of Count My Vote have always denied this when I've asked them this question, but I still have a gut feeling this is a Bob Bennett payback bill. Was it?
Boy, I think Bob Bennett. I think Senator Bennett in the way he left the legislature, the way he left the U.S. Senate, and some of the reactions afterwards just showed that there was something wrong, or at least in their minds. But it wasn't, in my mind, that isn't the crux of it. They look at Olene Walker, the Governor Walker was polled really highly, and she still didn't win in convention. Nolan Karras, along with John Huntsman, came out of that convention, and John Huntsman ended up winning the primary. Then you had the elections before that in the governor's race. You had Mike Leavitt, who was running for a third term as an executive. And anybody that follows politics closely knows that when an executive runs for the third term, that always tends to be, there's enough baggage that everybody's like, well, do we want to keep the executive? And Governor Leavitt went into a convention and won at convention still, but didn't win 60%. So at the end of the day, he had to have a primary. And I think you add up those three high-profile races, and it was enough for people to say the caucus system is broken, in their opinion.
Yeah.
I just look at to me, it's an establishment saying we can't let the grassroots of the party run the place anymore.
Yeah. Final question for you, Dan. One of the arguments that was made during this debate, and you're well aware of it, was that it would increase voter participation here in the state of Utah. Now, the recent midterms, we did see an increase in voter participation, but that was primarily because of some very interesting issues on the ballot. Overall, do you think it has increased voter participation?
Not at all. And that's the benefit we were looking for, right? It helped.
Yeah.
Really, what we saw helped major. The biggest improvement we've seen in voter turnout has been vote by mail, and people having the ballot mailed to their house, the time to go through research candidates and do that thing. That has really been probably one of the main drivers. We've done a bunch of other things innovatively to increase access to the ballot. Same-day voter registration. You go through all the things that we've done. And I tell you, the ballot is much more accessible in Utah, and we have better participation rates because of those measures. It has absolutely nothing to do with Count My Vote.
All right, Dan, always great chatting with you. I know you'll be busy here in a couple of weeks up on the Hill as lawmakers get together for the 2019 session. Thanks for joining us tonight, Dan.
Thanks so much, Russ.
All right, on our Newsmaker line, State Senator Dan McCay talking about a bill he will introduce to repeal Senate Bill 54. More coming up on the Rod Arquette Show and Utah's Talk Radio 105.9 KNRS.